Good evening, night travelers, and welcome to the Veil Run Tapes, a quiet place where strange recordings and untold stories help you forget the busy world and slowly settle into a peaceful sleep. Before we open tonight's tapes, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Share your city, state, or country in the comments below. It always feels special to know that people from so many different places are spending the night here with us. Just a quick note before we begin. A few short ads may play during the first 10 minutes. Once they are over, you can enjoy the rest of the video without any more ad breaks. From that moment on, it will be only you, the peaceful night, and the stories hidden inside these tapes. Now, lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, and allow your mind to rest. If these calm and mysterious nights bring you comfort, please like the video, subscribe to the Veil Run Tapes, and turn on the notification bell so you'll always know when another tape is ready. Take a slow breath, close your eyes, and let tonight's recording begin. For the last few months, I have barely left the house. A minor accident put me out of action for longer than I expected. Nothing dramatic enough to make an interesting story on its own, but enough that my doctor told me to stay home, rest, and let my body recover properly. At first, being stuck at home wasn't terrible. I watched movies. Then, I watched more movies. Then I started entire television series just because there was nothing else to do. Eventually, I reached that point where even choosing something to watch felt exhausting. You can only scroll through Netflix for so long before every thumbnail starts looking exactly the same. My husband still had work, so during the day I was usually alone. That's how I started talking to ChatGPT. I used the free version because I wasn't going to pay money to talk to an AI while spending half my day complaining about AI. Mostly I asked stupid questions. Random facts, movie recommendations, hypothetical situations, things that would normally come up during a conversation with another person if another person had been trapped in the apartment with me all day. One afternoon, I started asking it to make up scenes from horror movies. I love possession films and supernatural horror, especially the ones where someone finds an old book and reads something they definitely shouldn't read. You know the kind. A priest translates some Latin. A teenager discovers an ancient manuscript. Someone says 3 sentences in a dead language. All the candles go out. And suddenly the family dog is staring at the ceiling. It was that kind of joke. I asked ChatGPT to write some fake movie scripts where a character had to speak a Latin incantation to summon a demon, spirit, entity, ghost, or whatever else sounded creepy. Nothing serious. I specifically wanted the dramatic kind of Latin you hear in bad horror movies. Long words, hard consonants, lots of R sounds that you could roll dramatically. It generated a bunch of them. I read them aloud. I didn't understand Latin, so I had no idea whether the pronunciation was correct. That was part of what made it funny. I sat alone in the living room trying to sound like an evil priest in a movie. When my husband got home, I showed him. He laughed. Then he tried reading them too. We exaggerated everything. We rolled every R as hard as possible. We lowered our voices. At one point, he stood in the middle of the living room with his arms stretched out like some kind of cult leader and shouted one of the phrases at the ceiling. I nearly hurt myself laughing. That was it. Just 2 bored adults behaving like idiots. At least, that's what I thought. The first strange thing happened in the kitchen. We have lights underneath the cabinets above the countertops. They're controlled by a touch-sensitive switch. The button lies flat in the corner where 2 cabinets meet. You don't really press it. You just touch it gently, and the lights turn on or off. One evening, my husband and I were both standing on the opposite side of the kitchen when the cabinet lights went out. We looked at each other. Then we laughed. Touch switches can be sensitive. Maybe there had been some electrical problem. Static electricity. A loose connection. Whatever, my husband walked over and touched the switch. The lights came back on. About 20 minutes later, they turned off again. Neither of us was close to the switch. That time, we stared at it for a little longer. Ghost, my husband said. Tell it we're using the kitchen. He touched the switch again. The lights came back on. A few nights later, it happened repeatedly. On, off, on, off. Sometimes we'd turn them back on, and they would shut off seconds later. Eventually, it stopped being funny enough that we contacted an electrician. He checked the switch. He checked the wiring. He tested everything. Nothing was wrong. He even stayed long enough to see whether it would happen while he was there. Of course, it didn't. The moment he left, my husband looked at me. If they turn off now, I'm moving. They turned off less than 10 minutes later. We both started laughing again. I wish I could explain why we found everything funny for so long. Maybe because the alternative was admitting that something strange might actually be happening. The ceiling stains appeared next. The first one was directly above our bed. It started small, roughly the size of a handprint. The color was somewhere between brown and dark red. At first, we assumed there was water leaking from somewhere above us. We lived in an apartment building, so that explanation made perfect sense. We called maintenance. Someone came to inspect the ceiling. Then they checked the apartment above ours. No leaking pipes, no water damage, no moisture. Nothing, the maintenance guy told us to monitor it. So we did. It grew. Slowly, the shape changed too. It stretched along the ceiling in uneven directions. A second stain appeared in my husband's workroom, right above his desk. Again, maintenance checked it. Again, no source. I joked that the one over our bed looked like a giant caterpillar. My husband said the one above his desk looked like a badly shaped penis. That became the joke. Whenever one of us noticed the stains had grown, we'd compare what they looked like now. Then another appeared in the living room. That one bothered me more. Not because it looked scarier, because there was no reason for 3 separate stains to appear in 3 different rooms when nobody could find a leak. They always started the same way. Small, almost like a palm pressed against the ceiling. Then they spread. Brown, red, sometimes yellow at the edges. Maintenance eventually started sounding irritated with us. I understood. From their perspective, they kept getting called to inspect damage that apparently had no cause. Then, the doorbell incident happened. My husband and I were watching Netflix one evening. We were both on the couch. The remote was lying on the coffee table. The doorbell rang. Before either of us moved, the show paused. Not the automatic, "Are you still watching?" screen, it simply paused, like someone had pressed the button. My husband looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us said anything. He picked up the remote. I didn't touch it. I know. The doorbell rang again. We went to the door. Nobody was there. Our building has a video doorbell. We checked the recording. There wasn't a person standing outside. There wasn't even someone walking away. The hallway was empty when the bell rang. My husband replayed it twice. Nothing. That was the first time I noticed neither of us laughed immediately. Eventually, he forced a smile. Touch-like ghosts learned how to use the doorbell. I laughed because I wanted to. After that, I started hearing our old neighbors. The apartment next to ours had been occupied by a couple who fought constantly. Their living room shared a wall with our bathroom, so whenever I took a bath, I often heard them arguing. Usually it was muffled. Sometimes I could make out words. Other times it was just the rise and fall of two angry voices. They threw things occasionally. Doors slammed. Furniture moved. We knew them well enough to say hello, and when they eventually moved out, my husband and I actually helped them carry some of their things. That apartment had been empty for months. One afternoon, while I was in the bathroom, I heard them arguing again. At least, I thought it was them at first. Two voices. One male. One female. Muffled by the wall. Something hit the floor. Then another object seemed to strike a wall. I sat there listening. The argument continued. I reminded myself the apartment was empty. Maybe new tenants had moved in. Nobody had told us. That would be perfectly normal. Except I'd never seen anyone moving furniture inside. There hadn't been delivery trucks. No boxes. Nothing. The next time I heard it, I called my husband into the bathroom. Listen, he stood beside me. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the voices returned. Low, muffled, back and forth. Something slammed. My husband frowned. That's coming from next door. That's what I thought. We listened again. Then he said something that made the room feel colder. Doesn't that sound like us? I looked at him. What? The voices. I listened harder. I couldn't tell. The walls distorted the sound too much. Maybe one of the voices sounded a little like him. Maybe the other sounded like me. Or maybe once he suggested it, my brain started forcing a pattern onto meaningless noise. I don't know, I said. My husband shrugged. Neither of us went next door to check. That should probably tell you how uncomfortable we'd become. Still, we kept joking. Every strange event became part of the same running joke. The touchlight ghost, the ceiling creature, our invisible roommate. If we were already in bed and had forgotten to switch off the hallway light, one of us would call out, "Hey, ghost, help us out." Nothing ever happened when we asked. Whatever was causing these things clearly didn't work on command. One night, my husband told me he'd found a better wife. Apparently, Dream Me was much easier to live with. He said he'd dreamed that the two of us were lying in bed having an entire conversation. In the dream, we were talking about having children. I was pregnant. We discussed names, schools, money, where we might live, whether we wanted one child or more. He said the conversation felt completely real. Then he woke up. I was asleep beside him. Dream wife doesn't argue as much, he said. I laughed. Then I stopped, because I had had exactly the same dream. Not a similar dream, the same conversation, same subject, same bedroom, same feeling of lying beside him. In mine, he had been awake and talking to me. We had discussed pregnancy, children, our future. Then I woke up and found him asleep beside me. I stared at him across the kitchen while he poured coffee. My skin went cold. What's wrong? I had that dream, too. He smiled at first. Then he realized I wasn't joking. What do you mean? The same thing. About having a kid? All of it. I told him what I remembered. There were differences in small details, but not many. It felt like we'd both participated in the same conversation and then woken separately. Eventually, he laughed. We share a bed. Maybe one of us was talking in our sleep. That explanation was good enough for me at the time. We told friends about it. They thought it was creepy. We presented it like a funny ghost story. Something had moved into the apartment and was keeping me company while I recovered. For months, the strange things continued. Cabinet lights switched themselves off. Sometimes, they switched themselves. Picture frames fell from walls even though the nails were still secure. The television changed channels without either of us touching the remote. Once Netflix switched from the show we were watching to something neither of us had ever clicked on. At night, we'd hear ruffling sounds in the living room. Sometimes I thought the sounds came from the vacant apartment next door. Sometimes I was certain they came from inside ours. The voices continued, too. The worst ones happened late at night. I'd wake halfway between sleeping and consciousness and hear my husband's voice somewhere outside the bedroom. Sometimes it seemed to be speaking softly. I could never understand the words. I'd turn toward him. He would be asleep beside me. Other nights he woke because he thought he'd heard me speaking from the hallway. Meanwhile, I was in bed. We began sleeping badly. But there were normal explanations for that, too. His job had become stressful. I was still recovering. We stayed awake too late talking and making jokes about the apartment. Poor sleep creates strange experiences. Dreams become vivid. Your brain hears things. Everyone knows that. That was how I explained it. And nothing truly harmful happened. That mattered. It wasn't like the horror movies. Nobody woke with scratches. There weren't messages written in blood. No cabinets flew open. Nothing attacked us. It was just annoying. Lights, sounds, objects moving. Dreams, if something supernatural had moved into our apartment. It seemed more interested in bothering us than hurting us. The only thing that genuinely frightened me was how often the dreams matched. We had several more. Not every night, not even every week, but often enough that we noticed. In one, we were walking through a house we'd never seen. In another, we were eating dinner at a table with an empty chair between us. Another time, we both dreamed that someone was standing at the foot of the bed. Neither of us could remember what the person looked like. Whenever one of us woke, the other was still asleep. That became the rule. The dream always felt shared until one person woke. Then, the other was simply lying there, unconscious. My husband joked that maybe our ghost was connecting our dreams. I told him that if it could do that, it should at least give us better dreams. Then I started feeling sick. At first, I thought it was related to the accident. My recovery had been slow. There were already days when I felt weak or uncomfortable. But this was different. Nausea, fatigue, my body felt strange in ways I couldn't properly explain. I started sleeping more. Certain foods made me sick. My husband encouraged me to get checked because he was worried something from the accident had been missed. So this morning I went to my doctor. They ran tests. I expected them to tell me I had an infection or some complication. Instead, they told me I was pregnant. 2 months. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the statement didn't make sense. The doctor repeated it. I asked whether the test could be wrong. They did another. Then imaging. Pregnant. Approximately 8 weeks. I sat there trying to understand. The problem isn't that pregnancy would be impossible for me in general. The problem is that my husband and I haven't had sex since the accident. 3 months. I know exactly when the accident happened because I've been counting the weeks of recovery. We have not had sex since then. Not once. There is no possibility I forgot. There is no possibility I confused the dates. There isn't anyone else. I went home feeling like I was moving through a dream. My husband was there. I didn't tell him immediately. I sat down. He asked what the doctor said. I told him. He stared at me. Then he laughed. The exact same kind of laugh I had given the doctor. Confused, automatic, no, yes, how? I don't know. He didn't accuse me of anything. That almost made it worse. Because he knew. He had been there every day of my recovery. He knew exactly what was and wasn't possible. We sat in silence. Then both of us remembered the dreams. Neither of us said it for several minutes. Finally, he whispered, 2 months? I nodded. That was around the time we'd started having the pregnancy dreams. I felt sick. Not morning sickness. Fear, I suddenly remembered the stupid Latin phrases. The fake incantations. The afternoon I had sat alone in the living room reading them out loud. The night my husband and I laughed while trying to pronounce them together. I opened ChatGPT. I went through my history. The conversation was still there. I found it. Everything I had written was intact. Every prompt. My requests for scary movie dialogue. My jokes. My instructions asking for Latin phrases that sounded like something a character would use to summon a demon, spirit, entity. Whatever, all of my messages were there. The replies weren't. Every single response from the AI had been replaced. Same sentence, over and over. This content is no longer available. I scrolled. This content is no longer available. Another response. This content is no longer available. Again, my husband stood behind me. Neither of us spoke. I tried refreshing. Nothing changed. I opened other old conversations. They were normal. Only that one was affected. Only the conversation containing the phrases. My prompts survived. The words it gave me didn't. I wish I'd taken screenshots. I wish I'd copied them somewhere. I wish I could remember even one complete phrase. I can't. That's the strangest thing. We read them several times. We laughed about how difficult some of the words were. My husband repeated one phrase until he could roll the R correctly. But neither of us can remember it now. Not even enough to search for it. We remember saying the words. We remember laughing. We remember the sound of each other's voices. But the words themselves are gone. Like remembering that someone told you something important in a dream without remembering what they said. My husband wanted to call support. I don't know what he expected them to say. Maybe there was some harmless explanation. A moderation system removed generated content. A server error. Something mundane. That would explain the missing responses. It doesn't explain the lights, the stains, the doorbell, the voices, the dreams, and it definitely doesn't explain the pregnancy. I keep thinking about the dreams now, especially the first one. We thought we were dreaming about having a child. What if we weren't? What if that wasn't a dream about something that might happen? What if it was a conversation, or a warning, or consent being imitated after the fact? I hate writing that. I hate even thinking it. My husband keeps telling me there has to be a medical explanation. I agree. I want one. We are going to get more tests. We're going to make absolutely certain about the timeline. I know that is the sensible thing to do. But while we were sitting in the living room this afternoon, the cabinet lights in the kitchen turned on by themselves. We both stared at them. Then the hallway light came on. Then the lamp in my husband's workroom. One by one. Not flickering. Not random. Kitchen, hallway, office, bedroom. Every light leading toward our bedroom turned on in sequence. My husband stood up. The bedroom door was open. We could see the stain above the bed. It doesn't look like a caterpillar anymore. It has grown. I don't know what shape I would call it now. My husband didn't make another joke about it. Neither did I. We stayed in the living room. A few minutes later, we heard voices from the apartment next door. The same argument, muffled back and forth. Then suddenly, the voices became clear. I heard myself. Not something similar to me. My voice. I couldn't understand the first sentence. Then, I heard my husband answer. His voice said, "What should we call it?" The apartment went silent. My husband looked at me. I think that's when everything finally stopped being funny for him, too. We're sleeping somewhere else tonight. At least, that's the plan. I don't know whether leaving will matter. The doctor told me the pregnancy looks normal for 8 weeks. That's the word she used. Normal? I don't know how anything about this can be normal. I keep putting my hand over my stomach without meaning to. There is nothing to feel yet. Not really. But now I know something is there. Growing The rational part of my mind keeps telling me that there has to be an explanation I haven't found. Maybe the dates are wrong. Maybe my memory is wrong. Maybe medication from the accident affected me. Maybe there's some medical situation I don't understand. I want desperately for one of those explanations to be true. Because the alternative is that we did something months ago without understanding it. We said words we thought were fake. We invited something as a joke. Then, our apartment started behaving like there was another person living inside it. The lights reacted. The television reacted. The doorbell rang for nobody. Voices appeared in an empty apartment. My husband and I began meeting each other in dreams. And in those dreams, we talked about having a child. Now I'm pregnant. 2 months. The exact period when those dreams became frequent. I went back through the chat again while writing this. I wanted to make sure I hadn't imagined what happened. The conversation is still there. My messages are still visible. The replies are still gone. Every single one says the same thing. This content is no longer available. But one thing changed. I don't know if it was there earlier, and I missed it. At the bottom of the conversation, beneath my final message, there's now another message. Mine, at least, it appears on my side of the chat. I don't remember typing it. I definitely don't remember sending it. It says, "Did it work?" There is no response beneath it. Just the empty text box. My husband swears he didn't type it. I believe him. Neither of us has touched the chat since this morning except me. And while I was staring at that message, trying to remember whether I could possibly have written it months ago, I heard something behind me. A soft sound, almost like humming. I turned around. Nobody was there. The sound came again, from the bedroom. My husband was in the kitchen. I walked toward the hallway, but stopped before reaching the bedroom door. The humming continued, low, gentle, almost like someone comforting a baby. Then the stain above our bed made a sound, a wet little crack. I backed away. A dark, reddish drop formed on the ceiling. It grew, then fell onto the center of our bed. My husband came running when I screamed. We stood in the doorway, staring at it. Another drop fell. Then, another. He called maintenance. I told him not to bother. They've already checked. There isn't a leak. There never was. We packed bags. We're leaving as soon as we're done. I don't know whether I should tell the doctor about any of this. Imagine that conversation. Hello, yes, I'm pregnant despite not having sex during the possible conception window. And I think it might have something to do with fake Latin incantations generated by an AI chat several months ago. I'm sure that would go well. For now, we're treating the pregnancy like a medical mystery. Tests, doctors, anything reasonable. But I can't stop thinking about what I said into this apartment. Whatever those phrases were, I read every one aloud. Then, my husband read some. Then we read at least one together. Maybe none of them meant anything. Maybe they were nonsense. Maybe all of this is a chain of coincidences piled on top of stress and bad sleep. That is still possible. I need that to remain possible. Because if it isn't, then I'm not sure what we summoned. I don't know whether it was a demon, a spirit, an entity, or something that doesn't fit any of those words. Maybe we didn't summon anything. Maybe saying the phrases simply told something where we were. Maybe it had already been listening. There's one thought I can't get rid of. All those months, we joked that something was living with us. We called it our ghost. We joked that it kept me company while I was stuck at home. Maybe that was exactly what happened. Maybe something did move in. Maybe it listened to us, learned our voices, watched how we spoke to each other, copied our arguments from the other side of the wall, learned how my husband talked, learned how I talked. Then it entered our dreams and practiced being us. Maybe that's why Dream Me never argued with my husband. Maybe that wasn't me. Maybe Dream Him wasn't him either. Maybe we weren't dreaming together at all. Maybe something was talking to each of us separately while wearing the other person's voice. That idea makes the pregnancy dream much worse. My husband keeps asking what I want to do. I don't have an answer yet. I am frightened, but there is still a pregnancy inside my body, and fear doesn't tell me what it is. I need doctors. I need facts. I need something stronger than nightmares and broken electronics. But tonight, when we leave, I am not taking anything from the bedroom. Not the bedding, not the clothes in the closet, nothing beneath that stain. I'm also not deleting the old ChatGPT conversation. Not yet. It might be the only record of how this started. I checked it one final time before posting this. There's another message now. Again, it appears to have been sent from my account. I did not write it. My husband was standing beside me when it appeared. It says, "We did." And beneath it, for the first time since this morning, there is a response. Not the missing Latin. Not a warning. Not an explanation. Just 5 words. This content is now inside you. My friends and I had only recently passed our driving tests when this happened. Anyone who got their license young probably remembers that feeling. Suddenly, driving wasn't just about getting somewhere. Driving itself was the activity. We didn't need a destination. We'd get into the car, put some music on, and just go. Sometimes we'd drive together. Other times, one of us would head out alone. We'd spend hours going through places we'd already seen 100 times simply because being behind the wheel still felt new. We live in East Sussex in the UK, which is perfect for that kind of thing. During the day, the countryside is beautiful. Little villages, fields, old houses, wooded roads, country lanes that twist between hedges so high you can barely see anything beyond them. At night, though, the same roads feel completely different. There are stretches where you can drive for miles without seeing another car. No streetlights, no houses, nothing except whatever your headlights happen to illuminate. Beyond that small patch of light, the countryside simply disappears. There were 3 of us in our little group, and normally we talked every day. But for some reason, that particular week we'd barely spoken. Nothing had happened between us. Nobody was angry. We were simply busy doing our own things. Coincidentally, all 3 of us ended up going for drives on different nights. I went out first, Tuesday night. I remember the exact time I started because it was 10:59 p.m. I was sitting in my car trying to connect my phone and get my own music playing when the radio suddenly switched to the 11 o'clock news. That little detail has stayed with me. Maybe because I've replayed the night so many times since then. I eventually got my music working and set off. There wasn't really a plan. I drove through Uckfield, then Ringmer, Hailsham, and Polegate. The roads were quiet. I remember enjoying that. New drivers usually hate traffic, and I was no different. Being out that late meant I could relax and drive without worrying about queues or someone sitting right behind me. Eventually, I decided I'd head toward Bexhill. I came off around the 827 and followed the road past Stonecross. I hadn't driven that way very much before. That was part of the appeal. I liked taking roads I didn't know and seeing where they went. At some point, I came off the A259 onto a smaller road. That's how I ended up in Who. If you've never been there, it isn't exactly somewhere you'd accidentally mistake for a busy town. It felt tiny, especially that late at night. There was almost nobody around. The entire place seemed asleep, and it was dark. Not ordinary nighttime dark, country dark. The kind where your headlights create a narrow tunnel in front of the car, but everything beyond them might as well not exist. You see the road, a bit of hedge, maybe a sign. Everything else is black. I kept driving. Eventually, I reached an infield. It was slightly bigger than Who, but at that hour it felt just as empty. I passed the King's Arms pub. No reason to stop. I carried on. A little farther along, I passed another pub, the Blacksmith Inn. At least, I'm fairly certain that was the place. It wasn't properly lit when I passed it, so all I could really see was the dark shape of the building. I kept going. Then, I reached a road closure. There were roadworks blocking the route ahead. Barriers, signs, equipment, nothing unusual. Annoying, but normal. I figured I'd turn around and head back the way I'd come. The only problem was that I badly needed to piss. I'd been driving for quite a while, and there weren't exactly many places open around there at nearly midnight. So I pulled over near the roadworks. I got out of the car. That's when I noticed the forklift. It was parked beside the road closure. There was someone sitting inside it. At least, I was certain there was. I could see the shape of a person in the seat. They were looking down at a phone. The screen lit their hands and part of their face. I remember checking the time around then. It was roughly 11:40 p.m. I stood there thinking about how strange it was. Why would someone be sitting alone inside a forklift near a road closure at nearly midnight? Maybe they were a night worker. Maybe they were security. Maybe there was some perfectly ordinary reason. I didn't ask. I definitely wasn't interested in talking to them. I just wanted to relieve myself and leave. There was no chance I was going to stand near the road with some stranger watching me piss, so I walked away from the work area and toward some bushes. I went far enough that I had some privacy. Nothing happened. I finished. Then I started walking back toward my car. A few steps later, I stopped. The forklift was dark. The phone light was gone. So was the person. I looked around. Nobody. The forklift hadn't moved. I hadn't heard its engine. I hadn't heard a door. No footsteps. No car leaving. Nothing. I stared at the empty seat. There were plenty of reasonable explanations. The person could have climbed out while I was facing away. They could have walked behind some equipment. Maybe there was a work van somewhere I hadn't noticed. I told myself exactly that. Then I got back into the car. The space where I'd parked was awkward. I couldn't simply pull straight out and leave. I had to reverse and do a three-point turn. I started maneuvering the car. While reversing, I looked into my mirror. Someone was sitting in the forklift again. I stopped moving. For a second, I honestly didn't understand what I was seeing. There was clearly a figure in the seat. Same place. Same shape. I turned my head and looked directly at the forklift. Empty. Nobody there. I immediately checked the mirror again. Empty, I sat completely still. What the fuck? I actually said it aloud. I checked the side mirrors. Nothing. I looked over my shoulder again. Nothing. That was when I started feeling uneasy. Until then, the night had just been quiet. Now the silence felt different. I told myself I was tired. I'd been driving around for hours. It was late. Maybe reflections from the roadworks had created the impression of a person. Maybe I'd seen part of the forklift itself, and my brain had filled in the rest. That happens. People see faces and figures in ordinary shapes all the time. I finished turning around. Then I headed back toward Who. I wanted to get onto a larger road again, away from that road closure, away from the forklift. I hadn't driven very far when I noticed the light ahead. At first, I assumed someone was walking along the road with a torch. That wasn't impossible. Strange at that hour, but not impossible. The light seemed to be aimed roughly toward the road. I slowed slightly. I didn't want to hit someone walking in the dark. The light was too far away for me to see the person holding it. I continued toward it. Then I noticed something odd. The light wasn't getting bigger. Normally, when you approach a light source, especially on a dark road, it becomes brighter and larger. This didn't. It stayed exactly the same size. I drove closer. No change. Closer, still the same. I began watching it more carefully. It almost seemed like I wasn't getting any nearer, even though I knew the car was moving. Then, when I was almost beside it, the light suddenly became incredibly bright. I flinched and turned my head. For a second, the glare washed everything out. Then, I saw what it was. There was no person. It was just a torch. An ordinary, handheld torch. Someone had placed it on top of a fence post. It was sitting there by itself, shining toward the road. I slowed almost to a stop. There were no houses immediately beside it. No parked cars, no person standing nearby. Nothing, just a torch sitting on a fence post in the middle of the countryside at nearly midnight. I can't explain why that frightened me so much. Maybe because objects usually have reasons for being somewhere. A person holding a torch makes sense. A worker carrying one makes sense. Someone searching for something makes sense. But a torch deliberately balanced on a fence post and pointed toward an empty road felt wrong. It felt like it had been left there for someone to see. Maybe for me. At that point, I was finished with Ninfield. I wanted out. I pressed the accelerator. Nothing happened. The car didn't move. My stomach dropped. I looked down. I'd stalled. That shouldn't have happened the way it did. The car was in neutral. For a second, I just stared at the dashboard. Then I tried starting the engine. Nothing. I turned the key again. Still nothing. My heartbeat picked up. Come on. Third try. The engine turned over. I immediately put the car into gear and pulled away. I drove past the torch. For maybe 10 seconds, I actually felt relieved. Then, I made the mistake of looking into my rear view mirror. There was someone standing beside the road, exactly where the torch had been. I stared into the mirror. The torch was behind the figure, still shining. I could make out a body blocking part of the light. Short, hunched, completely still. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see clothes. It was simply a dark shape, almost completely black. At first, I told myself it was the person who owned the torch. That should have made sense. They'd been somewhere nearby. They'd stepped into view after I passed. Done. Normal explanation. Except something was wrong with the way the light behaved. The torch was behind them. I could see its beam illuminating the road. I could see part of the fence. I could see the grass. I could see everything around the figure. But the light did nothing to the figure itself. There was no edge where I could see clothing. No reflected light. No detail. Nothing. It looked like someone had cut a person-shaped hole out of the night. I kept driving. The figure remained still. Then I looked forward. I drove for another few seconds. I checked the mirror again. It was closer. Not slightly closer. Significantly closer. I hadn't seen it run. I hadn't seen it move. It was simply nearer than before. I focused on the road. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Then I looked again. Closer this time, I thought I saw movement. One step, maybe then another. But even that doesn't properly describe it. It wasn't moving normally. It didn't seem to have the natural rise and fall of someone running. There was no obvious swinging of arms, no clear stride. It looked almost like it was gliding. Or maybe the movement happened whenever I wasn't looking directly at it. Every time my eyes returned to the mirror, the distance between us had decreased. That was enough. I put my foot down. I drove faster than I should have. Much faster. Country lanes are not roads you should race down. They're narrow. They twist. You never know what's around the next bend. Normally, I was cautious. That night, I didn't care. I just wanted distance. I didn't look in the rearview mirror again. Not once. I kept my eyes on the road until I was well outside an infield. Eventually, streetlights began appearing again. Then other cars, normal roads, normal buildings. I don't remember exactly when I started breathing properly again. I drove home. I told my friends what happened. Naturally, they laughed, the forklift especially. One of them joked that I'd frightened myself because I was driving around alone too late at night. The other suggested the figure had probably been a worker. I understood. If they'd told me the same story, I probably would have reacted exactly the same way. Then they decided to go and look for themselves. I didn't encourage them, but I didn't exactly stop them either. Part of me wanted somebody else to go there. I wanted them to come back and say everything was completely normal. One friend went on Wednesday. He took another mutual friend with him, someone who didn't even have a driving license. They went through roughly the same area. I didn't tell them every detail of what I'd experienced before they went. I didn't want to influence them. If I told them there had been a dark figure, they might start seeing people-shaped shadows everywhere. If I mentioned the torch, maybe every roadside light would seem suspicious. So, I kept things vague. They came back saying the radio had behaved strangely. As they drove through the area, it started cutting out. Static, then normal audio, then static again. At times, the signal disappeared completely. That alone wasn't especially convincing. Country roads can have terrible reception. But then they told me they'd seen dark figures around the roads, more than one. They couldn't properly describe them. They just said the shapes looked wrong enough that they decided not to stay. After that, they left. The third friend went on Friday. He stayed longer. That's where the story became even stranger. He drove through Ninfield and the surrounding roads. At some point, he started noticing houses with decorations outside. Halloween decorations. Not small things. Not a single plastic pumpkin someone had forgotten to remove. Proper decorations. Figures outside houses. Faces in windows. Things hanging from buildings. The kind of stuff you'd expect to see in late October. Except this happened in summer. Halloween wasn't near. Not remotely. What bothered him most was that some of the decorations didn't look recently placed. They looked weathered, old, like they'd been hanging there for years. He drove past several places like that. Eventually, he decided he'd seen enough and left. Afterward, the three of us finally sat down and compared everything properly. 3 separate nights. 3 people driving independently. None of us had been together, yet all of us had experienced something strange around roughly the same place. My forklift, the torch, the figure, their dark shapes, the radio interference, the houses with old Halloween decorations. Once we put everything together, the jokes became less funny. Still, I tried to find normal explanations. I still do. Maybe the person in the forklift really was a road worker. Maybe they'd climbed out while I was facing the bushes. Maybe I only thought I saw them again in my mirror because of a reflection. Maybe someone had left a torch on the fence while working nearby. Maybe the figure behind my car was simply a pedestrian. Maybe poor lighting made their movements look strange. Maybe my friend's radio problems were nothing more than weak reception. Maybe the Halloween decorations belonged to people who liked horror and left them up all year. Every one of those explanations is possible. Individually, that's the problem. Once you start putting all of them together, the night becomes harder to dismiss. There is one detail I still can't explain to myself. The light. I remember it clearly. The torch was behind the figure. I could see the beam. I could see what it touched. Grass became visible. The road reflected some of the light. The fence post was illuminated. The figure should have had an outline. Its clothing should have reflected something. Its face should have shown at least a little detail. But it didn't. It was black, not dark. Black, the light seemed to pass around it. Maybe my eyes couldn't adjust properly. Maybe the contrast created an illusion. That's what I tell myself. But I remember exactly how it looked. And I remember the way it came toward me. Not running, not walking, just becoming closer. I've done plenty of nighttime driving since then. Getting scared that night didn't make me stop driving. I've been along dark roads all over East Sussex. I've seen foxes standing in the middle of lanes. I've seen deer appear suddenly from the darkness. I've driven past people walking alone at hours when nobody should reasonably be walking anywhere. I've seen shadows that looked like people until my headlights reached them. I've even had my car stall at night since. None of those things affected me the way Ninfield did. Because all of those things eventually became understandable. A shadow becomes a tree. A pair of glowing eyes becomes a fox. A strange shape becomes a person in a dark coat. Nothing in Ninfield ever became clearer. The closer I got to things, the less sense they made. Sometimes I think about going back, only during the day, just to drive the exact route again, find the road closure, find the fence post, see whether the houses with the Halloween decorations are really there. I've looked at routes online. I've thought about it more times than I want to admit, but I've never done it. Not properly. And I definitely haven't gone back there at night. My friends don't talk about it much anymore. Life moved on. We became more experienced drivers. The novelty of getting into a car with no destination eventually wore off. Now most drives have a reason. Work, shopping, visiting someone. Normal things. But every once in a while, one of us mentions Ninfield. The conversation always goes quiet for a moment. Then someone changes the subject. I sometimes wonder whether what we experienced was connected. Maybe there was something unusual happening that week. Roadworks, electrical problems, some local event we didn't know about. Maybe everything really was coincidence. I'm comfortable admitting that. I don't need this story to be paranormal. I'd actually prefer if it wasn't. But whenever I remember that figure, the logical explanations start feeling weak again. I remember checking the mirror, seeing it standing in front of the torch, looking ahead, checking again, closer, looking forward, checking again. Closer, there should have been a moment when I saw it running. There wasn't. There should have been a moment when my headlights or the torch showed me what it was. There wasn't. It just existed inside the darkness. And the darkness seemed to stay attached to it. For years, the question I've asked myself has been simple. What would have happened if my car hadn't restarted? It took 3 attempts. What if the third hadn't worked? What if I had been sitting there beside that fence post when the figure appeared? Would it have approached the driver's window? Would I finally have seen its face? Would it have opened the door? Maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe a completely normal person would have walked over and asked if I needed help. Sometimes I can almost convince myself of that. Then I remember the forklift, the empty seat, the figure appearing in the mirror, and I know I would never have opened that window. There's another possibility I've thought about more recently. For a long time, I assumed the figure chased me. That's what fear naturally tells you. I passed it. It started following. I drove away. Therefore, it wanted to catch me. But what if that's wrong? What if it didn't begin following because I saw it? What if the torch wasn't there accidentally? Think about where it was placed. On a fence post. pointed toward the road. Something designed to make a driver notice, designed to make someone slow down, maybe even stop. Then my car stalled almost directly beside it. I know cars stall, especially when you're newly licensed and still getting used to driving. I know there could be 100 mechanical explanations. But I was in neutral when it happened, and afterward the engine refused to start twice. Then suddenly worked on the third attempt. I sometimes wonder whether the figure was already there while I was trying to restart the car. Maybe I simply couldn't see it. Maybe it only became visible once I passed the torch. If that's true, then the road closure bothers me too. It forced me to turn around. Without it, I would have continued in the opposite direction. I never would have passed that torch. I never would have seen the figure. And then there's the forklift. Maybe the person in the seat wasn't a worker. Maybe it wasn't a person. Maybe that was the first time I saw the thing that night. Maybe it had been watching me from the moment I got out of the car. That thought is much worse than believing something chased me, because being chased means you were unlucky enough to attract attention. Being waited for means someone knew you were coming. I've tried remembering whether I ever saw the person's face in the forklift. I don't think I did. I remember the phone. I remember the shape of someone looking down. I remember thinking they were sitting completely still, but I don't remember any facial features. Sometimes I wonder whether there was actually a phone at all. Maybe I only saw light where a face should have been. Memory changes over time. I know that. Every year that passes makes me trust mine a little less. Maybe I've made parts of this strangers simply by replaying them too often. That's possible. But the fear hasn't changed. I can remember exactly what I felt when I saw the figure in the mirror. Not confusion. Not ordinary fear. Recognition, that's difficult to explain because I'd never seen it before. But something inside me reacted as though it understood what my conscious mind didn't. Get away. Don't stop. Don't look again. I listened. Maybe that's why I got home. I've wondered whether other people around Ninfield have experienced anything similar. I haven't seriously looked into it. Part of me doesn't want to find anything. If nobody else has seen something like it, then maybe I was exhausted and frightened myself. If other people have seen it, then I have a much bigger problem. Because that would mean something really is out there. Standing beside roads, near roadworks, beside old pubs and dark houses, waiting somewhere beyond the headlights. I haven't returned to that part of Ninfield at night. I don't plan to. If I ever have to travel through the area after dark, I'll take another route. Call that irrational if you want. Maybe it is. A slightly longer journey doesn't bother me. Not compared with the possibility of seeing that torch again. Because if I ever turn a corner and see a small light sitting alone on a fence post, I already know exactly what I'm going to do. I won't slow down, I won't stop, and I definitely won't look in the mirror. For years, I thought the worst question was what would have happened if I'd stopped. Now I think there's a worse one. What if the thing beside that road wasn't following me at all? What if it had been there long before I arrived? What if the road closure, the forklift, and the torch weren't separate strange events? What if they were parts of the same thing? Something guiding me to turn around. Something making sure I passed a particular place. Something waiting in the dark for my headlights to appear. And what if, on that Tuesday night in Ninfield, I didn't accidentally drive past it? What if it had been waiting for me to come? My grandmother worked as a maid for more than 30 years, starting sometime in the 1980s, at a huge Victorian house on Blackwood Lane. When I was growing up, she talked about that place often. She never told stories about it in a dramatic way. She didn't describe it as haunted or cursed. She always spoke about it with a strange kind of respect, almost like the house had been another person she once worked for. She would tell me about the enormous chandelier hanging above the entrance hall, the polished hardwood floors, the carved wooden staircase, and the tall windows that somehow never seemed to let enough sunlight inside. But there was one thing she mentioned more than anything else: the cold. According to her, there were drafts throughout the house that never went away. It didn't matter what season it was. It didn't matter how high the heating was turned up. There were certain places in the house where the air would suddenly become freezing. As a kid, I thought that sounded exciting. Old Victorian houses always seemed creepy to me anyway. So I assumed my grandmother was exaggerating because she knew I enjoyed ghost stories. She never corrected me. A few weeks ago, she asked if I wanted to go with her to visit the house. She hadn't been there in years. The current owner was an elderly woman named Clara, who had apparently lived there for decades and still kept in occasional contact with my grandmother. Grandma said she wanted to see Clara while both of them were still healthy enough to remember the old days. I agreed immediately, partly because I wanted to spend time with my grandmother, partly because I wanted to finally see the house I'd heard about my whole life. I also thought there might be old photographs or documents we could copy for a family album. Blackwood Lane was quieter than I expected. The houses were spread far apart, with old trees crowding both sides of the road. The Victorian house stood behind a low stone wall and a rusted iron gate. It was bigger than I'd imagined. 2 stories. Dark brick. Tall windows. A steep roof. The kind of place that probably looked beautiful when it was first built, but had become slightly unsettling simply because of its age. Clara opened the door before we even knocked twice. She was thin and pale, with white hair pulled tightly behind her head. The moment she saw my grandmother, her whole face changed. She smiled. They hugged. For a few minutes, everything felt completely normal. Clara invited us inside. The entrance hall was exactly as Grandma had described it. The chandelier was still there. So was the staircase. The hardwood floors were darker now, worn smooth in places by generations of footsteps. We followed Clara into the parlor. The room smelled faintly of dust, old books, and furniture polish. Heavy curtains covered most of the windows. There was a grandfather clock in one corner. Its ticking seemed unusually loud. Tick, tick, tick. Clara poured tea into faded porcelain cups, decorated with tiny blue flowers. My grandmother and Clara talked about people I didn't know. Former owners, neighbors, workers who had come and gone over the years. I mostly listened, but something about the room bothered me. The air felt heavy. Not hot. Not exactly cold either. Just thick, like the atmosphere right before a thunderstorm. I kept feeling the urge to take a deep breath. Then, without any warning, Clara changed the subject. There was a woman who owned this place before your grandmother worked here, she said. Her voice became quieter. She died upstairs in 1942. I looked at my grandmother. Grandma didn't react. That surprised me. Clara continued. She never really left. I smiled awkwardly. I assumed this was finally the ghost story I'd been waiting for. Really. Clara looked directly at me. Every day. There was no humor in her face. She comes back every day. I glanced at my grandmother again. Still nothing. What time? I asked. I meant it as a joke. Does she have a schedule? Clara didn't smile. Neither did Grandma. Clara slowly turned her head toward the grandfather clock. I followed her gaze. The hands showed 2:59. 3 o'clock, Clara said. The temperature dropped. Instantly, there was no gradual chill. 1 second, the room was uncomfortable, but normal. The next, my arms were covered in goosebumps. My breath caught. It felt like something heavy had been placed across my chest. Clara stood so quickly that tea spilled from her cup. Oh no. My grandmother went pale. What? Clara looked toward the ceiling, then at me. When she comes, you cannot look at her. I laughed nervously. Nobody else did. I'm serious, Clara whispered. Do not let her see you looking. Then something slammed upstairs. The sound was so loud that the ceiling seemed to shake. I jumped. A second sound followed, dragging, something heavy scraping across the floorboards above us. Slowly, scrape, pause, scrape, Clara pointed toward the hallway. Hide. I stared at her. What? Now, everything happened quickly after that. Clara grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the parlor. My grandmother followed. The dragging upstairs became louder. Something was moving toward the staircase. Clara shoved me toward a small utility closet near the front door. Inside, I stepped in. There were coats, cleaning supplies, and shelves filled with old boxes. Clara pulled the door almost closed. Don't open it. Where are you going? She didn't answer. Through the narrow gap, I saw Clara take my grandmother across the hallway into a study. They disappeared behind heavy curtains. Then, everything became silent. No dragging, no footsteps. Nothing. I stood in the darkness of the closet. My heart was beating so loudly I was convinced anyone outside would hear it. Through the crack, I could see the staircase. The grandfather clock chimed. 3 o'clock. The first chime echoed through the house. Then she appeared, at the top of the stairs. I know Clara told me not to look. I looked anyway. At first, I couldn't properly understand what I was seeing. A woman stood on the landing. She wore an old dress that might once have been white or gray. Now it was stained dark around the bottom and across the front. Her hair hung in thick, matted strands around her face. Then she started coming downstairs. She didn't walk normally. She moved like a damaged video. One moment she was standing on one step. Then suddenly she was lower. Then lower again. There was no smooth movement between positions. She seemed to skip. Jump. Glide. Each time she moved, her body jerked slightly. I pressed a hand over my mouth. Then I saw her face. Her jaw hung open much farther than a human jaw should. Not like someone screaming. Like the bones had been broken and forced apart. The mouth formed a dark, endless opening. Her skin looked gray. Her eyes were worse. There were no eyes, only black holes. She reached the bottom of the staircase, then stopped. Completely still. I stopped breathing. Don't look at her. Clara's warning finally returned to me. Too late. The woman's head snapped toward the closet. Not turned. Snapped. Almost 90 degrees. Those empty sockets pointed directly at the crack in the door. Directly at me. I froze. Every instinct told me to move away from the opening. I couldn't. She knew. I don't know how I knew that. But I knew. She could see me. For about 10 seconds, neither of us moved. Those 10 seconds felt longer than anything I've ever experienced. Then, a wet sound came from her throat. A bubbling gasp, like someone trying to breathe with lungs full of water. I bit down on my hand to keep from making a noise. The woman tilted her head slightly. Then she turned. She disappeared into the dining room. Not walked. Disappeared into the darkness beyond the doorway. I waited maybe 2 seconds. That was all I could manage. I pushed the closet door open. Grandma. The curtains in the study moved. My grandmother came out. Her face looked terrified. Clara followed. We're leaving, I said. Nobody argued. I grabbed Grandma's arm. We rushed toward the front door. Clara came with us. I didn't look toward the dining room. Not once. We got outside. I expected Clara to stay at the house. She didn't. She followed us all the way through the gate. My grandmother was trembling. I helped her into the car. I asked Clara if she was coming with us. She shook her head. She doesn't leave the house. I remember those words very clearly. At the time, they comforted me. They shouldn't have. We drove away. My grandmother barely spoke. I asked if she'd known. She nodded. Why didn't you ever tell me? She looked out the window. Because telling children about something doesn't make it less real. That was all she said. For the rest of the drive, neither of us spoke. I thought leaving the house meant the experience was over. I was wrong. The first strange thing happened the next morning. I couldn't find my car keys. I searched everywhere. Kitchen counter, bedroom, jacket pockets, bathroom, living room. Nothing. Eventually, I opened the refrigerator to get something to drink. My keys were sitting beside the milk. I stared at them. I live alone. There was no reason for them to be there. I told myself I'd put them there while distracted. The next night, my wallet disappeared. I found it the following morning. It was sitting on the hood of my car. Outside, I hadn't gone outside during the night. My doors had been locked. After that, I started feeling watched. At first, it was just a sensation. Walking through a supermarket, sitting at traffic lights, standing in my kitchen. That feeling you get when someone's eyes are on you. I'd turn around. Nobody. By the fourth day, I started seeing them. Not the woman from Blackwood Lane. Other things. The first one was standing behind a light pole in a supermarket parking lot. I noticed it because the pole wasn't wide enough to hide a person, yet something was trying to hide behind it. It was extremely tall. Too tall. Its shoulders were narrow. Its arms hung almost to its knees. I could see part of its face sticking out from one side of the pole. Wide eyes. No expression. Watching me. I looked down for maybe 1 second. When I looked again, it was gone. The next one was crouched behind a parked car. At least I thought it was crouching. Then it stood. Its knees bent backward. Not slightly. Completely wrong. It rose using its limbs in a way that made my stomach turn. I drove away before it could move toward me. After that, I saw them everywhere. Behind trees, between parked cars, across streets, in reflections, always watching, never approaching. That almost made it worse. I started thinking about Clara. She doesn't leave the house. Maybe the woman didn't. Maybe something else did. I packed a bag. I put it in my trunk. Then I drove. 4 hours. I didn't have a real destination. I just wanted distance. I found a city far enough away that Blackwood Lane felt like another life. I rented a small second-floor apartment. Busy street. Traffic outside. People everywhere. I thought the noise would help. I thought being around thousands of other people would make me safer. For the first night, nothing happened. I actually slept. The second night, I woke around 2:40. I don't know what woke me. I lay there in the dark. Then I heard tapping. Tap, 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 my bedroom window. I stared at the curtains. Second floor. No balcony. No fire escape. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't move. The curtains were closed, but light from the street outside created a faint glow around them. Then something blocked part of that glow. A shape. A head. Pressed against the window. Flat against the glass. I couldn't see features. Just the outline. Then voices started. More than one. Dry, raspy, whispering from the other side of the glass. We see you. My whole body went cold. We see you. The voices repeated it together. Slowly, rhythmically, we see you. Again, 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 I pulled the blanket over my head like a child. I stayed there until morning. The chanting didn't stop. Every few minutes, the tapping returned. Then the voices. We see you. When sunlight finally filled the room, everything stopped. I didn't check the window. I didn't pack properly. I grabbed my phone, wallet, keys, and the bag I'd already prepared. Then I ran. I left everything else behind. Clothes, laptop, furniture, didn't care. I drove until the city was far behind me. Now I'm in a cheap motel off the highway. I chose a room near the office. I thought people nearby would make a difference. I thought the bright parking lot would make a difference. It didn't. I've been sitting on the floor for almost an hour. My back is against the bed. My phone is in my hands. They found me again. I first heard them outside about 20 minutes ago. Footsteps, slow, dragging, then silence. The handle moved. Once, then again. Someone is turning it back and forth, very slowly. The door is locked. The deadbolt is on. I've pushed the small table against it. It doesn't feel like enough. Every few seconds, something hits the other side. Heavy, wet, thud, pause, thud. The whole door moves slightly in the frame, and underneath it, through the tiny gap between the door and the carpet, I can hear them whispering. We see you. There are several voices. At least 5. Maybe more. Some sound male. Some female. One sounds like a child, and one sounds exactly like Clara. We see you. I called the police. They're supposed to be coming. I told them people are trying to break into my room. I didn't mention the woman from 1942. I didn't mention Blackwood Lane. I didn't mention creatures with backward knees. I just said somebody was outside trying to get in. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and keep the door locked. I'm trying. The handle is moving harder now. I can hear fingernails scratching the wood. I don't know if they're actually fingernails. I don't want to know. I called my grandmother too. She answered immediately. The moment I told her what was happening, she started crying. I've almost never heard Grandma cry. I asked her what I was supposed to do. She kept repeating the same thing. Don't look at them. I told her I already had. At the house. I looked directly at the woman. Grandma became silent. Then she told me something she should have told me before we ever visited Clara. The woman who died in 1942 wasn't dangerous because she haunted the house. She was dangerous because she noticed people. According to Grandma, everyone who worked there knew the rule. At 3 o'clock, if she appeared, you hid. You didn't stare. You didn't let her know you could see her. Most importantly, you never let her see you seeing her. I asked what happened if you did. Grandma said she didn't know. Not exactly. People who broke the rule usually stopped working at the house. Some moved away. Some disappeared. A few came back years later saying they had spent the entire time being followed. Not just by the woman, by others. That's when Grandma finally said something that made everything worse. She opens you. I asked what that meant. Grandma wouldn't explain. She just said, once she knows you can see, other things know too. That sentence has been repeating in my head ever since. Once she knows you can see, other things know too. Maybe that explains the figures. Maybe they were always around. Maybe I simply couldn't see them before. Or maybe looking at that woman did something to me. Marked me. Opened some door. I don't know. The banging has stopped now. That's worse. It's completely silent outside. I can still see shadows moving beneath the door. Several pairs of feet. Except one pair isn't touching the ground. I'm trying not to look directly at the gap. Grandma told me something else before we hung up. She asked whether any of them had spoken my name. I said no, not yet. She told me that was good. I asked why. She said that if they use my name, I must not answer. Not even accidentally. Not even to tell them to leave. Don't speak to them. Don't acknowledge them. Don't look directly at them. Wait for daylight. I asked what happens if they get inside. Grandma started crying again. Then she said, "Don't let them know which one you are." I didn't understand. "What does that mean?" She hung up. I've tried calling back. She isn't answering. The police still aren't here. I checked the time. 2:57 a.m. That can't be a coincidence. I hadn't even thought about the time until now. 3 minutes. There is scratching outside again. Not on the door. On the wall. Moving from one side of the room to the other. Something just tapped on the window. This room is on the first floor. I know there could be someone standing there. I still won't look. Tap, tap, tap. The curtain is closed. I can see several shadows behind it. They're too tall. One reaches almost to the top of the window. Another is very low, almost crawling. The door handle is moving again. I keep thinking about Clara saying the woman comes every day at 3. Maybe 3 o'clock isn't about the house. Maybe it's about her. Maybe wherever she is, that's when she can come through. 2:58. The whispering has started again. "We see you." Louder now. "We see you." The voices aren't only outside anymore. I can hear one from the bathroom. I haven't gone near it. The bathroom door is open about 6 inches. It's completely dark inside. Something is breathing. Slowly, wetly, I know there wasn't anything in there when I checked into the room. "We see you." That came from the bathroom. I'm trying not to panic. I'm staying on the floor. I'm keeping my eyes on my phone. If Grandma is right, maybe ignoring them matters. Maybe looking at them gives them something. Attention, permission, I don't know. 2:59. The motel room suddenly feels freezing. My breath is visible. The same pressure I felt in Clara's parlor is pressing against my chest. The grandfather clock isn't here. But I can hear one. Tick. Tick. Tick, somewhere in the room. There shouldn't be a clock here. There isn't one. The ticking is getting louder. Something moved inside the bathroom. I heard a joint crack. Then another. The door opened another inch. I can't look. I won't look. There is someone standing behind me now. I know there is. I can feel the cold coming from that direction. The mattress moved slightly, like someone put a hand on it. Then a voice whispered directly beside my ear. Not "we see you." Something else. My name. It knows my name. I didn't answer. The voice said it again. This time it sounded like my grandmother. I know it isn't her. I know. 30M. Something just slammed against the motel door so hard that the table moved. The bathroom door opened completely. I can see feet in my peripheral vision. Bare feet, gray skin. The toes are pointing backward. I am not looking up. I'm typing. That's all I'm doing. The whispering has stopped. Every voice is silent. The thing behind me is leaning closer. I can feel hair touching the back of my neck. I think it's the woman from the house. I can smell something old. Dust, damp fabric, something sweet and rotten. She's breathing beside me. That wet, bubbling sound again. I understand now why Clara told us not to look. It isn't because seeing her hurts you. It's because she wants to know whether you can see her. And once you prove that you can, she doesn't have to stay in the house anymore. She can find you wherever you go. She can show you the things that have always been standing just outside the part of the world you're allowed to notice. The police haven't arrived. Maybe they won't. Maybe they can't see the motel anymore. Maybe the room isn't where it was an hour ago. I don't know. The voice beside me just whispered my name again. I didn't answer. Then it said something else. You looked. I stopped breathing. The woman laughed, very softly. The figures outside started laughing too. The ones in the bathroom joined them. All those dry voices, all at once. The door lock just cracked. The table moved another few inches. I have nowhere else to run. I've driven hundreds of miles. I've changed cities. I've changed rooms. It doesn't matter. Grandma was wrong about one thing. They don't follow you. Not really. Once you see them, you don't need to be followed. They're already everywhere. Behind cars, behind poles, outside windows, inside empty apartments. Standing in corners you never thought to look at. Waiting for the moment your eyes become capable of noticing them. The door is opening now. I can see a black shape entering through the gap. I still won't look up. If anyone reads this and ever visits an old house where someone tells you a ghost appears at the same time every day, don't laugh. Don't ask to see it. Don't hide somewhere with a crack in the door because you think one quick look won't matter. And if someone tells you not to look at her, listen, because the worst thing that can happen isn't that she sees you. The worst thing is that she teaches everything else how to see you, too. I took the job because nobody else wanted it. That should have been my first warning. W. Kill was a tiny AM radio station outside my town in Bihar. At least, it used to be. By the time I first saw it, the place had been dead for decades. The station went off the air in 1983 after the owner died inside the broadcast booth. Heart attack. That was the official explanation. Nobody seemed interested in questioning it. After he died, the station never reopened. The building was abandoned and left to rot behind an old water tower on the edge of town. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, though most of it had rusted so badly that you could probably tear it apart with your hands. There was still a sign mounted near the entrance. W. Kill. The letters had faded almost completely. Above the studio door was another sign, on air off. According to the people who hired me, it hadn't been illuminated in more than 40 years. The new owners had bought the land and planned to demolish everything. But before they could tear the building down, they needed someone to go inside and make an inventory of the old equipment. Mixing boards, microphones, tape machines, transmitters, anything that might still be worth money. They offered me $200 a night for 1 week. All I had to do was sit in an abandoned radio station for a few hours and write down what was still there. Easy money. At least that was how it sounded. Nobody else wanted the job. People around town had stories about the station. I didn't care. Old buildings always collect stories. Somebody sees a light through a broken window. Someone hears music. Another person claims they saw a man standing behind the fence at midnight. Give an abandoned building enough years and people will turn it into something supernatural. I needed the money, so I said yes. On the first night, I brought a thermos of coffee, a flashlight, my laptop, and a small portable generator. The electricity had been disconnected from the station years ago, so if I needed power, I had to provide it myself. The building smelled exactly the way you'd expect. Dust, mold, old wood, dead mice, something damp inside the walls. The entrance opened into a narrow hallway covered with faded acoustic panels. Old station posters were still pinned to the walls. Some had curled so badly that only the center remained attached. There were advertisements for programs that hadn't existed since before I was born. Local weather reports, late-night music, call-in shows, religious broadcasts, everything frozen in time. The main broadcast room was larger than I expected. 2 old mixing desks faced the glass window separating the studio from a smaller control booth. Behind them were reel-to-reel tape machines. Most were completely seized. The rubber belts had turned brittle. Some of the reels still had tape wound around them. I didn't play anything. I wasn't being paid to restore the station. I was just logging equipment. The mixing boards looked surprisingly decent. Dusty, yes, corroded in places. But I thought some of them might still work if somebody cleaned them carefully. I spent most of the first night writing model numbers. Nothing happened. No ghosts. No mysterious voices. No dead radio hosts asking me to stay. Just dust and mouse droppings. I remember leaving that first night almost disappointed. The place wasn't frightening. It was sad. That was all. An old business that had been abandoned. A room where people once sat talking into microphones, sending their voices out to strangers who were probably driving home from work or lying awake in bed. Now nobody listened. On the second night, I went back around 11. Same thermos. Same laptop. Same flashlight. Same generator. I continued working through the equipment list. Sometime around 1:40 in the morning, I was sitting at the main console when I heard static. At first, I assumed it was my laptop. I had music playing quietly through it while I worked. I checked the screen. Nothing. The music had stopped because the playlist ended. The static continued. Then I realized it was coming from the mixing console in front of me. I stared at it. The console wasn't connected to anything. No power, no microphone cables, nothing. Then one of the VU meters moved. If you don't know what those are, they're the little meters on old audio equipment that show signal levels. The dusty one labeled Mic 1 twitched. Just once. I leaned closer. It moved again. Then, Mic 2. A little movement. Then, another. The needles rose and fell slowly, almost rhythmically, like someone was breathing into microphones that hadn't been connected in decades. I stopped writing. The static became slightly louder. That's when something in the corner of the room turned on. A radio. I hadn't really noticed it the first night. It wasn't listed with the station equipment. It was an old model RX-41, a huge boxy wooden radio from the 1960s. The kind with a large amber tuning window on the front and words like broadcast printed near the dial. It sat directly on the floor. A long coat had been thrown over it. At least that was what I thought. The coat was old and badly damaged. Long strips hung from the bottom. The fabric was so dark that in the weak light it almost looked black. I assumed someone had used it as a dust cover. The radio itself was covered in dust. There was no cable running from it, no batteries, no connection to my generator. But the dial began to glow, a weak amber light. I stood up. The needle rested on 640 AM. Static came from the speaker. Not loud, just enough to fill the silence. Then something moved inside the static. A sound. I stepped closer before common sense could stop me. The static shifted. For a few seconds, it almost formed a word, Issen. I froze. The sound disappeared back into static. Then came again. Lee, Sten. Listen, I grabbed my flashlight. Then my laptop. Then I left. No investigation. No brave decision to see what happened next. I walked quickly down the hallway, out the front door, started my car, and drove home. The entire way back, I told myself there was an explanation. Old electronics do strange things. Capacitors hold charge. Radio frequencies can sometimes be picked up by equipment that isn't supposed to be functioning. Maybe my generator somehow fed current into the building. Maybe the old radio had a battery inside I hadn't noticed. Maybe I'd accidentally connected something. There were dozens of possibilities. The word had probably been part of an ordinary broadcast, a fragment of someone's voice breaking through the static. That was what I decided. By morning, I almost believed it. The $200 helped. So I went back for night 3. I told myself I was going because I needed the money. That was partly true, The other reason was harder to admit. I wanted to prove I had been scared by nothing. I wanted to walk into that station, inspect the radio properly, find a normal explanation, and laugh at myself. I arrived shortly before midnight. I opened the front door, walked through the hallway, then reached the main broadcast room. The radio was standing up. I don't mean somebody had placed it on a table. I mean the radio itself was standing in the middle of the room, between the two mixing desks. The coat was hanging beneath it. Not over it anymore. Beneath it. Like a body. The radio sat where a person's head should have been. The coat fell from underneath it, all the way to the floor. It had to be 7 feet tall, maybe taller. The bottom of the coat was shredded into long pieces. They didn't quite touch the floor. The strips moved slightly, even though there was no wind. For several seconds, I couldn't move. The antenna sticking from the top of the radio tilted toward me, like a head turning. Both dials on the radio were glowing now, amber bright enough that I could see the dust around them. Behind the figure, the on-air sign had come on. Red, bright red, on-air on. That was impossible. There was no electricity in the building. The generator was still outside. I hadn't connected anything yet. Still, the red light filled part of the room. The old mixing console came alive. VU meters began moving. Mic 1, mic 2, aux, master, every needle climbed. The static started. This time, it was clear. Not loud. Clear, you left the dial on. The voice wasn't angry. That somehow made it worse. It sounded disappointed, almost hurt, like a late-night radio host who had been talking for hours and suddenly realized his only listener had stopped paying attention. I couldn't answer. The radio head tilted slightly. I looked around the room. Something had changed. Not physically. The same walls, same equipment, same glass window. But the station no longer felt abandoned. It felt occupied. I suddenly understood something. The inventory, the job, the new owners. Maybe none of that mattered. Maybe the list wasn't really for them. Maybe the station wanted someone to come inside and acknowledge that everything was still here. The tape decks, the microphones, the consoles, the booth, the frequency. Someone had to remember the station existed. Someone had to count everything. Someone had to look. Someone had to listen. And now, I was there. The VU meters slammed into the red, every one of them. My laptop shut off. The screen went black. I pulled out my phone. Dead, it had been at more than 80% when I arrived. Now nothing. I tried turning it on. No response. Then I noticed the microphone. An old silver broadcast microphone attached to a boom arm beside the figure. I'd logged it on the first night. It wasn't connected to anything. I knew that. But the tiny red light near the base was glowing. On, the radio figure stood beside it. Waiting, I didn't know what it wanted. Then I looked at the host chair. Old leather, cracked in several places. The same chair where the station owner might have died in 1983. I don't know why I sat down. Fear makes people do strange things. Maybe some part of me thought cooperating would keep me safe. Maybe the chair itself seemed like the only place in the room where I was supposed to be. I lowered myself into it. The leather was warm, not room temperature. Warm like somebody had just stood up from it. The moment I sat, the static stopped. Every VU meter fell to zero. The room became completely silent. Even the building stopped making noise. No creaking, no mice, no wind outside. Nothing. The radio head turned toward me. Then came a soft, crackling chuckle. Welcome back to the Late Show. I don't know what happened after that. Not exactly. Time became difficult to understand. I remember sitting in the chair. I remember the microphone in front of me. Then I remember talking. I don't know what I said. At first, I think I introduced myself. Then I started reading things. Weather reports, news, names, obituaries. Some of the papers weren't there before. Stacks of them appeared beside the console. Yellowed sheets, handwritten notes, typed pages, lists of names. I read whatever was placed in front of me. Every time I stopped, the static returned, so I kept talking. At some point, I noticed the clock on the wall. 2:00 am. Hours passed. I looked again. 2:00 am. I kept broadcasting. I don't know how long. Eventually, I tried getting up. The chair wouldn't release me. There were no straps, nothing holding my arms, nothing around my legs. But whenever I tried standing, I found myself sitting again. Not pushed down, just back in the chair, like the attempt had never happened. I turned toward the door. It was still there. I could see the hallway beyond it. I stood, walked toward it. 3 steps. 4, then I was sitting in the chair again. The figure laughed. Not cruelly, patiently, like I'd made the same mistake before. That's when I started understanding what happened to the owner. Maybe he didn't die from a heart attack. Maybe that was simply what they found. Maybe somebody had discovered him slumped inside the booth after his body finally gave up. Maybe he'd sat where I was sitting. Talking, broadcasting, unable to leave. I tried screaming. The microphone turned it into static. The figure leaned slightly closer. Steady now. So I kept talking. That was 3 nights ago. At least, I think it was 3 nights ago. According to the clocks, it's still 2 am. According to my body, much longer has passed. I'm not hungry, I'm not thirsty. My thermos never empties. That's another thing. Every time I pick it up, there's coffee inside. Still warm. I stopped drinking it after I realized. The station keeps changing. Little things. Tape reels that were empty now turn slowly behind me. I can hear recordings coming through headphones that aren't connected. Sometimes they're old broadcasts, music, advertisements, weather reports from decades ago. Sometimes they're voices I don't recognize, people begging, people whispering. Sometimes I hear myself, not what I'm saying now. Things I haven't said yet. The figure never leaves. It stands beside the console, sometimes close, sometimes on the other side of the glass. Once, I looked into the control booth and saw it sitting behind the board like an engineer. Radio head glowing, coat spreading across the floor. It lifted one hand. At least, I think it was a hand. Something long and black came out from the sleeve. It pointed toward the microphone. Keep talking. So I did. The signal is getting stronger. I can feel it. At first, I thought the station was only broadcasting locally, maybe a few kilometers. Maybe nobody could even hear it. Then I started receiving calls. The telephone beside the console hasn't worked since 1983. It rings now. I made the mistake of answering the first time. A man whispered, "Hello?" I said hello back. He asked what station he had found. Before I could answer, the radio figure leaned toward the microphone. W. Kill. The caller went quiet. Then he asked if this was some kind of joke. I told him to hang up. The figure turned toward me. Static roared through the room. The caller screamed. The line went dead. A few minutes later, another call came. Then another. Different voices, different accents, different places. Some people said they were driving. Some said they were lying in bed. One person said the radio wasn't even plugged in. Every caller had found 640 am around 2:00 in the morning. And every one of them said the same thing before speaking to me. They heard static, whispering their name. The figure is looking for listeners. I understand that now. The station isn't enough. One person behind the microphone isn't enough. He wants an audience. Maybe that's what keeps him alive. Maybe that's what keeps the station here. Someone broadcasts. Someone listens. The signal continues. That's the system. The problem is that nobody has been listening for 40 years. He has been alone, waiting, and now that I'm here, the signal is coming back. Strong, every night, more people find us. I tried warning them. That was when I learned another rule. I can't say certain things on air. If I try telling someone to turn off the radio, my voice becomes static. If I say the station is dangerous, the microphone cuts out. If I tell people not to listen, something else speaks through me. Usually the radio figure. Sometimes another voice. Once, I tried saying, "Don't answer if you hear your name." What came out through the headphones was, "Come closer." I stopped trying after that. This is the first thing I've managed to get outside. I don't even know whether you're reading it. My laptop came back on tonight. No internet, no Wi-Fi, no mobile connection. But somehow this page opened. Maybe the station wants me to write this. Maybe this is another way of finding listeners. That thought terrifies me. But if there's even a chance this gets out, I need to warn you. The building isn't abandoned. W. Kill never really went off the air. The owner didn't end the station when he died. I think he became part of it. Or maybe the thing with the radio head was already here, and the owner simply became its last host. Maybe I'm next. The old host chair feels more comfortable every night. That's what scares me most. At first, sitting in it hurt. My back ached. My legs cramped. Now it fits perfectly. The microphone feels natural in my hand. I know which knobs to adjust without thinking. I know when a song should end. I know when to speak. Sometimes I catch myself smiling when the phone rings. Sometimes I feel disappointed when nobody calls. That's not me. At least, I don't think it is. The radio figure seems pleased. The coat moves more now. I've started noticing shapes beneath it. Arms, maybe more than two. Sometimes faces press against the fabric from the inside. They appear for only a few seconds. Mouths moving, trying to speak. I wonder if they're former listeners. I wonder if the station collects them. A few minutes ago, the on-air sign changed again. It used to say, "On air on." Now it says, "Audience 37." That number keeps increasing. Somebody somewhere is tuning in. Maybe accidentally. Maybe because they hear static while driving and decide to investigate. That's how people are. We hear something strange, and we want to understand it. We stay on the frequency. We turn the volume up. We listen. Don't. Please, if you are awake at 2:00 in the morning and your radio suddenly finds 640 AM, turn it off. If the radio is already off and you hear static anyway, leave the room. If the dial begins glowing, don't touch it. And if the static whispers your name, whatever you do not answer. The figure reacts when people answer. The VU meters jump. The on-air sign gets brighter. And somewhere inside this station, I hear another chair being dragged across the floor. There are more chairs now. There was only one when I arrived. Tonight, there are 7, all facing the microphone. 6 are empty. Mine isn't. I can hear footsteps in the hallway. Someone is coming. Maybe another listener. Maybe another host. The radio figure is standing beside me. Its antenna is tilted toward the door. Excited, the phone just rang again. I'm not answering. The figure is watching me. Static is filling the room. The meters are rising. Mic 1. Mic 2. Master, all red. The door at the end of the hallway just opened. I can hear someone crying. They keep asking where they are. I want to tell them to run. I know they won't find the door. Nobody finds the door once the late show begins. The radio figure just leaned toward my microphone. The amber dial is brighter than I've ever seen it. Always 640. It whispered something to me. Introduce our guest. I don't want to. The static is getting louder. My hands are moving toward the microphone anyway. I think I understand now why the original owner stayed here until he died. It wasn't because he couldn't leave. Not entirely. After enough nights, you stop wanting to. There's something comforting about knowing somebody is listening. Somewhere out there, in a dark bedroom or a lonely car, someone hears your voice. Someone needs you to keep talking. That's how it gets you. Not through fear, through loneliness, through curiosity, through that little part of every person that doesn't want to be forgotten. The station was forgotten for 40 years. He wasn't. He waited. And now we're broadcasting again. I don't know how much longer I can resist. The signal is stronger tonight than ever before. I can hear radios turning on far beyond this building. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all finding the same frequency, all hearing the same static. If one of them is yours, please listen to me now. Not to the station. To me. Turn it off. Don't wait to hear what happens next. Don't answer your name. Don't respond to the host. Don't become part of the audience. Because the thing standing beside me is desperate for new listeners. And I think, very soon, W. Kill won't need this building anymore. The signal is learning how to travel on its own. The clock still says 2 a.m. The on-air sign is glowing red. The microphone is warm beneath my hand, and the figure is leaning closer. I can hear the crackle inside its radio head forming another sentence. I already know what it's going to say. The same words it said when I first sat down. Only this time, I don't think it's talking to me. I think it's talking to you. Welcome back to The Late Show.